Today, I'm talking with Andrew Irvin, a project officer at the Micronesian Centre for Sustainable Transport, based over in Fiji. Pacific Islands are a key region for the development of wind propulsion, and there's great potential over there, also for the development of alternative fuels as well. There's some really interesting projects underway over there, and we're going to be hearing about one of those from Andrew. So, Andrew, welcome to IWSA's Weekly Interview Series.
Thank you for having me, Gavin.
No,
it's a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure to have you. And, I know it's quite late at night over there, so really appreciate you staying up to talk with us. We'll kick things off with a short presentation about Micronesian Centre for Sustainable Transport, the region, and the project that you're going to be talking about today. So just bear with me and we'll do share screen here.
I'll be here. Greetings to all. Yokwe and Vinakawaka Levu. I'm Andrew Irvin, Project Officer at the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport. I've been working in the Pacific Islands region for the last 8 years, previously in my capacity with the Climate Change Mitigation and Risk Reduction Program of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and now with MCST as the manager of Project Cerulean, a joint research initiative between the University of the South Pacific and Swire Shipping. The Pacific Islands Transport Forum and Expo in 2017 provided an opportunity to draw attention to the systemic issues facing the region as a result of inefficient and costly transport exercises. The announcement of the joint research project between Swire and USP served as a unique opportunity to merge sectoral analysis within academia of the transport sector with the opportunity to explore, in a practical setting, the socioeconomic and environmental benefits of providing low-carbon freighter service to outer island communities. Over the course of the project, we've analyzed the opportunities to address cargo shipments on a variety of routes. As the project has proceeded, focus was drawn to a route oriented on a south to north axis, potentially inclusive of island communities in Fiji, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Marshall Islands. The pressing needs identified in each country can be summarized through the issues below. First, regularity and quality of service for outer island communities. Secondly, reduction of costs, both commodities, fuel, and the associated emissions with fuel consumption. And third, reducing urbanization and concentration of risk. Supporting decentralization of benefits from national level initiatives is crucial to the outputs of this project. In the context of financial burdens of Pacific maritime trade, the figures provided above are only addressing the capital-to-capital port costs, where outer island shipping costs can be over 300% more expensive than landing goods in the capitals listed above. A low-carbon solution which reduces operating costs of providing service to outer islands is an economic imperative and is one of the largest hidden costs we have yet to tackle as a region within the international development agenda. Phase 1 of Project Cerulean is currently coming to its conclusion, with cargo and route assessments as well as design review analysis undertaken to identify the most viable approach to facilitating not only research into what type of international trade best works for Pacific Island countries, but what shipping structure best serves the largest distribution of the population within each of the countries under consideration for the Project Cerulean vessel route. One crucial component to the work MCST is conducting under Project Cerulean is the evaluation of various available maritime technologies to make the most appropriate decisions in the design process to realize targeted efficiency improvements. Prioritizing low-carbon thrust for the Cerulean vessel is expected to generate significant savings, in excess of 25% on conventional thrust. And a key component of the research in Phase 2 will include evaluating the degree to which low-carbon technology reduces operational costs, thereby providing both potential for profitable operations to serve communities otherwise only receiving service through subsidized routes, as well as downstream emissions reductions. Now, at the end of Phase 1, concluding in Q4 of 2020, if the business case for operational trials proves viable, it is expected Swire will expand the scope of the joint research project from economic assessment and vessel design activities into Phase 2. This next phase will include 2 stages, the first of which involves completing the full build design with the support of Lloyd's Register to ensure that design may meet classification standards. This will lead to undertaking construction of a new build vessel, fit to purpose for inter-island routes where markets are currently underserved. Stage 2 of Phase 2 will involve a 2-year operational trial, where commercial operations are undertaken, accompanied by extensive data collection through socioeconomic and environmental research efforts, enabling Swire to further quantify monetary and non-monetary return on investment. The research efforts have been informed by the commercial successes of the unique case of the SV Kwai, which has provided service to the Line Islands of Kiribati for over a decade. This is depicted by the route outlined on the right. The prospect of exploring the route outlined on the left, which may create benefits for Fiji, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Marshall Islands, as well as possibly Wallis and Futuna, will require continued coordination with the governments of each country and the Central Pacific Shipping Commission to facilitate this exercise in the coming years. If the route is supported by the countries and the Commission, the resultant data from the Cerulean Project should help inform all nations of the region in making more efficient, cost-effective policy and operational decisions in addressing both their domestic shipping needs and facilitating healthy, sustainable inter-island trade, inclusive not just of capital ports, but touching the lives of communities often left outside the margins. Drawing upon the expertise of both experienced vessel operators within the region, inclusive of Island Ventures Limited, owners and operators of the SV Kwai, Captains Brad Ives and Evie Reshef, Kiribati National Shipping Line CEO and former SPC shipping advisor, Captain John Rounds, Professor Captain Michael Voss and his team from Hochschule Emdenleer in Germany, and the expertise of Dr. Tristan Smith of University College of London, MCST has assembled a detailed analysis of the potential and preferable design parameters for the vessel. Building upon these parameters, MCST issued a tender for preliminary design and cost estimates, circulated to the broader industry with the support of the International Windship Association, for which we are extraordinarily grateful. Through this tender process, MCST has engaged VPLP, a French naval architecture and marine engineering firm which has provided a bespoke design for a 40-meter cargo vessel, working with Lloyd's Register and the design review team to ensure appropriate preparations for a full build design which may be constructed within the Pacific Island countries, will be readily available for Swire shipping to deploy in the event of Phase 2's approval. Project Cerulean represents the first practical public-private partnership undertaken to identify the next generation of shipping solutions inclusive of decarbonization priorities. With the project oversight and financing provided by Swire Shipping, the marine engineering and industry standardization expertise of VPLP and Lloyd's Register, alongside the practical expertise of Island Ventures' operation of the SV Kwai, a broad coalition of the private sector operating both regionally and globally has been enlisted in providing solutions. They have been supported by the academic institutions of Hochschule Emdenleer, University College of London, and the University of the South Pacific to meet the demonstrated needs of national shipping services in Fiji, Kiribati, the Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu, which have been open and willing partners in the provision of data and information revealing the economic realities, challenges, and opportunities for supporting some of the most widely dispersed communities in the world. On that note, I'd like to thank the International Windship Association and Gavin Allwright in particular for continued interest and involvement in supporting the development of solutions to address the maritime realities of the Pacific Island countries. None of this work comes to fruition in a vacuum, and collaboration, collegiality, and open exchange all contribute to the value of our efforts and the achievement of our collective goals. Thank you all, and I look forward to exchanges with you in the future.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. That was a really good roundup of what you're looking at with this Carillion, and I hope I pronounced that right, Carillion project. And also, I really like that last slide on the collegiate and collaborative approach, and it really came through that whole presentation that you really are working in a multi-stakeholder project. So I have a question based on that. You talked about some of the drivers and issues that are specifically a problem in the Pacific. One being the phenomenally higher cost of moving a single TEU in the Pacific. Could you expand a little bit on those drivers and barriers that are pushing the Carillion project?
Yeah, and this is actually something I just spoke about. I was on a call right before this with some folks at TU Delft, looking at a master's project on the economics of Pacific shipping. There's just, within a global market environment, there is absolutely no way for a region where, if you discount, the population of about 4 million people in New Zealand and 23 million in Australia, the region, 10 million people, 8 of which are in Papua New Guinea. And so there are about 2 million people responsible for an area the size of Africa. And they're spread across these, far-flung archipelago nations, many of which are atoll nations, low-lying. I was looking at the route for Project Cerulean. One of the islands it touches upon is Nulakita. There are about 36 people on Nulakita. Mm-hmm. And that's an island that gets government shipping service once, possibly twice a month, depending on the routing of the Manafulau and the Nivanga 3. And so there's just absolutely no way in what neoliberals like to deem a free market environment that you can provide economic service to these islands. It's not feasible within the global economy.
And those lines are generally subsidized by governments?
Absolutely. So we have international shipping lines, and I can provide you additional details, in subsequent slides, if you'd like, on the international shipping services provided by companies like Swire and others. But at a domestic level, once you get to capital ports, domestic shipping services are almost exclusively provided by government subsidized shipping lines. So you've got Marshall Islands Shipping Company in the Marshall Islands. Tuvalu has 2 government vessels. I mentioned the Nivanga 3 and the Manafulau. You've got a handful under the government shipping service franchise scheme in Fiji. There are about 20, just under 20 lines that are provided, and they're all subsidized to the tune of 250,000 Fiji dollars plus each per annum. There's no way to do it without subsidies. It's all coming out of the taxpayer coffers to make sure that these outer island communities are given some sort of regularity in service. Otherwise, it would be completely neglected.
So that to me suggests quite an elephant in the room question, which is, why hasn't this happened before? Why haven't we seen this?
A big piece of why we haven't seen this is because it's the fossil fuel paradigm has made it. It used to be cost effective. A century ago, it was fine. It was fine when you had decentralized producers on different islands creating, different products that were useful within other islands in the same island groups. And so you have these small, the hub and spoke model. You have certain islands where you're able to get hardwoods, certain islands where you're able to get agricultural productivity, and they would exchange with each other. Certain islands, people were living on islands without readily available agricultural services. They were able to go to the next island over because they were reliant on nothing but wind. And once you introduce the, barrels of oil into the equation, and you continually have to bring barrels of oil into the capital ports and then distribute them in smaller quantities as the price increases each leg along that journey, it just becomes untenable for archipelago nations that, were able to subsist viably and successfully, sustainably for thousands of years under a fossil fuel paradigm. They collapse, and we see this immense push towards urbanization and depopulation of outer island communities.
Right. So that brings me to a sort of further question. How do you actually see the market for primarily wind propulsion or wind auxiliary vessels? How do you see that market developing over the near to say medium term, say the next 5 years going on through to 10?
Well, I think the main thing that we expect is we, as a region, so we'll talk about this a bit more in a bit, but the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership that's been proposed by the Marshall Islands government and the Fiji government is angling towards a 40% reduction in emissions for domestic shipping by 2030. And we know, based off of, I've got this, I keep it in arm's reach most of the time, proceedings on the regional conference on sail motor propulsion by the Asian Development Bank from 1985, just at the tail end of the oil crisis caused, in the late 70s with OPEC and the market collapse. They found this is basically what, Peter and I have talked about as kind of a Rosetta Stone for the Pacific on the savings that can be accrued. And it's readily acknowledged 25% of that 40% can be achieved through retrofit and new build incorporation of wind propulsion. We know there are options. So, that we talk about was it Cousteau's boat with the French rotor system, Flettner rotors by German and Norse power companies, and then all of the incredibly mature and available soft sail technology that can easily realize at least 25% of that 40% required. There are other, hull cleaning and, hull form options for increasing by a few different percentage points, just adding it up to get the rest of the way there. But that alone gets you the majority of the way there, is including wind propulsion in the current sail system, the current propulsion systems.
No,
sail systems make up the difference.
No, absolutely, and that's very much a hybrid approach that the association, the International Windship Association, has been taking. In combination, wind starts to make the economics and also the just the general savings, the efficiencies starts to make sense. Starts to bring those strands together and deliver a big bang for your buck, as it were.
Yeah. And I know people, they'll often say the devil is in the details. And I will say, when it comes to economics, the monster is in the margins. When it comes to, the fuel cost associated with providing service to the Pacific, 25% makes a difference. And that's part of what I've had to calculate, on behalf of Swire funding this project. They wanted to see what the economic benefits would be from incorporating a sail system back into a new build design. And I was incredibly conservative in my estimates because I did not want to paint a rosier picture than we could actually deliver. I didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. But at minimum, it was 24.7% fuel savings just from including the sail rig. And I know that, we included some renderings and just a very low resolution general arrangement side view. But, we've arrived at that in coordination with our design review team, working with Hochschule Emden. They looked at oh, what, can we use a kite or a rotor system? And Swire said, well, let's not throw too many novel, entities at the board at one time. We'll look at, a traditional steel monohull vessel. Let's just put sails back on it and see what we can do. And this is the design that between the design review team, everyone mentioned, in VPLP, we've got this very unique looking profile on this vessel. And we're very excited to see, if phase 2 is approved, what we can actually achieve with this. And I hope, I like I said, it was a conservative estimate. I hope we see beyond 25%. And if we're able to get more significant fuel savings, I just held up this book. This is the Namatai Sao, which was retrofitted. It was a vessel designed and constructed in the late 70s and retrofitted. It did not have any, solar PV provision for power on board. We're going to have some additional features that will increase efficiency beyond what the Namatai Sao and the SV Kwai have been able to achieve through their retrofits. So that's what we're really excited about.
So we're looking at maybe the first vessel being, if phase 2 is agreed upon, we'd be looking at a vessel built over the next couple of years. Would that be?
We expect the vessel to be completed in 2021 and then go into operational trials in 2022 and 2023. So I know the entire idea is to have it built in the Pacific. I've got a list. I've gone through every shipyard that has the capacity to build this vessel of this scale and this type, between New Zealand, Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Fiji.
Yeah.
There are only a handful, less than a dozen shipyards that are prepared to do this sort of work. We would like to see it built in Fiji if possible. And if so, then I'll be able to document it on a weekly basis, go do a time lapse, video shoot and make sure that we see how it's proceeding over the course of the year. And then I will definitely be on board for at least the first and the last voyages of this 2-year trial period, and intermittently, as much as my wife will allow me to go out to sea, go out and survey the communities that are serviced by this vessel and see what kind of impacts it's having on their socioeconomic well-being, and importantly to Swire, and just for the sake of modeling emission savings, is doing an entire carbon footprint for the entire, from the construction point on all the way through operations. And we'll project out through decommissioning, on a 30-year lifespan for the vessel.
No, that's fantastic. And actually, what you've just talked about was probably my last kind of discussion point here. Is you talked about non-monetary benefits, and while employment is of course a monetary issue, and a lot of the sustainable development economic impacts are monetary, the fact that you would be helping to revitalize potentially the shipbuilding sector in Fiji, those are quality jobs. Those are real anchor point developments with a large supply chain. So we're talking about an input into the sustainable development of a major industry sector in Fiji. Am I reading that correctly? Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I would say, this is something I've included in the business case. And I hope, this is all, because we're working with Swire, and there are a number of different private sector interests involved. They're making sure I don't release intellectual property. As a researcher, I want to publish things and share it as much as I possibly can, but I have to be a little bit more sensitive than I normally would be. But in the business case, I was able to calculate, the value of this project, and we'll talk about it a little bit, briefly in the Q&A section. But the labor estimates that VPLP was able to provide based off the discussions with the shipyards, we're looking at least $600,000 for the construction of the first vessel. So that, if we scale that up, we that's going to include 30 new shipbuilders. As far as labor, there's going to be at least 30, islanders working on this vessel. If we go on to a prospective phase 3 and we scale up towards, say for instance, the maximum value, looking at 50 vessels, over the next 10 years, that's 1,500 people that have jobs if building the next 50 vessels. And that's where you start getting to actual, percentages of GDP. You look at the value of the project, you end up at 3% of Fiji's GDP if they end up building all of it here. And I mentioned, in the context of a COVID-afflicted economy where tourism has dropped off and we lose 30% of the value of GDP and income due to these sort of reliances upon external inputs into the economy and the tourism market, it is not insubstantial to recover 10% of that by building up your domestic shipbuilding market. And that's just the Cerulean program or project at fully scaled up phase 3. When we talk about the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership and other regional needs, this doesn't meet all of the regional needs. This doesn't involve passenger ferries. This doesn't involve some of the domestic capacity for bulk carriers between capital ports. So this is just one piece of the equation that we know needs to be included to keep these outer island communities as viable parts of the domestic economies in each of these countries.
And touching on that, maybe my last point before we go on to the sort of quick fire round of questions. You talked about the maritime plan for the Pacific. Could you just explain just a little, in a few sentences, what that actually is and the vision that we have developing in the Pacific Island?
Yeah, so what the Fiji government and the Marshall Islands government announced at the UNSG summit last year, 2019 in September, was the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, which, we know, and I know that the International Windship Association knows and understands this better than most people in the industry and the global community at large, is technology is not the issue. Cost is the issue, especially for the Pacific, where we have incredibly constrained economies. It's not a technology issue. It's how do we finance this transition and jump the gap? We look at, for instance, the telecommunications industry. We saw what happened with, basically, you went from radio directly to mobile. We never had landline uptake on outer islands. We went directly to mobile because it made sense for the economies here, and it made sense from an infrastructure standpoint. We know that the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership will address, there's the infrastructure equation, what happens port side, the shipbuilding side, which is tied into infrastructure, and then the operational side of things. Do we have seafarers, and what kind of new vessels are these seafarers going to be equipped to operate? So we know that, for instance, a vessel at the scale of the Namatai Sao and the Cerulean vessel, you need 1,500 gross tons before you start getting seafaring qualifications. But we need seafarers, men and women, who can operate these smaller vessels that actually meet the needs of the region, as opposed to necessarily the needs of the international seafaring qualifications. So we're trying to build a regionally appropriate economy and qualifications framework to address those specific needs. And so the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership is meant to catalyze the investment of $500 million into addressing those three needs: the infrastructure, the shipbuilding, and the design and seafaring side of it. So the Cerulean Project, if we scaled up to 50 vessels over the coming decade, would make up approximately 150 million of that. It leaves a huge amount of that, the majority, towards the infrastructure and the shipbuilding side of it, and addressing the other structural needs and economic needs of the region.
500 million, if you'll excuse the pun, is not a drop in the ocean, but it's obviously going to,
especially at the scale of the economies that we're dealing with.
Sure, and I'm sure that this will be leveraging private investment as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's I think one of the most successful and interesting elements of the Cerulean projects thus far, is that we've been able to engage with a number of different private sector partners, and it's been one of the few, at least thus far, successful exercises in private sector and public sector collaboration, that we've been able to get this sort of open forum for the greater benefit of the region to catalyze and actually, provide some research outputs that say, okay, here's what we're looking at, here's what's worth doing, here's what needs to be done, and here's the business case for actually proceeding. And it's tight. I mean, the margins are tight. It's just, I like I said, I didn't want to sugarcoat it, but we need to make sure that we keep reducing fossil fuel inputs to improve those margins over the coming decade. And we've got like this starting baseline where we can see the improvements and build upon as we incorporate new technology and streamline these systems. I know you mentioned economies of scale, but yeah, I think at that I'll leave it with you.
No, exciting days ahead, and a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. I hope so.
Well, we're going to finish off with a kind of quick fire round, and I'm a little bit conscious of the time, so I'd like to. I'll probably pick out about 5 of the questions that we have here.
Okay. Well, I've actually got a script for all of them.
Oh, okay, great. Well, the first one is on a personal basis, and I ask all my interviewees, how did you get into this field personally? It's a long way from home.
Yeah, I'm from Ohio. I grew up in a cornfield, basically, and that's part of it. I've been an advocate for non-motorized land transport, specifically bicycling, for years. And I began working with USP starting in 2014 when I began at IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And Dr. Peter Nuttall, who's now my technical advisor at MCSD, he suggested I take over project management for phase 1 of Project Cerulean, following our collective efforts on the Pacific Island Transport Forum and Expo in 2018.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Alternative fuels. We've been talking about wind propulsion, particularly, obviously, being the International Windship Association, this is a major focus for us. But wind doesn't work without alternative fuels. You have to have alternative fuels in the mix here. So what alternative fuels are actually being considered to go hand in hand with the wind propulsion in the Pacific as a whole? And I'm assuming this isn't probably going to be a one-size-fits-all, but please enlighten me.
Yeah, so we've been considering biofuel options, as biofuel compatibility has been a design requirement for the project. However, biofuel access and utilization, it's very much dependent and contingent upon production, availability, and pricing. So for our price projections, in the business case, I utilized high, median, and low-end cost estimates based off of the Pacific fuel price monitors that have been published for years by SPC. But they range from US 77 cents per liter up to $1.42 per liter. It's incredibly high fuel cost. And, fuel, much like everything else delivered into the region, it incurs shipping premiums and it raises the cost beyond most other regions in the world.
And what is the price of marine diesel at present?
Yeah, well, that's the average is around $1.11 US.
So
it's and that's Fiji has some of the lower prices. It ranges. We've got countries like Tuvalu or Niue. It just shoots up. It's just the economies of scale are not there.
So we're talking well over $1,000 per ton of marine fuel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which when we're looking at $300 on a Rotterdam or Singapore price, that periphery issue of the delivery of that fuel to the region is pushing those prices up. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm gonna sort of bring this down. Do you feel the Carillion project, and I think I already know the answer to this, but anyway, do you feel the Carillion project has the potential to be a model for other regions, so non-Pacific regions?
Okay, so I think now it's certainly catered towards servicing small communities. So there may be opportunities for regular routes between less populated islands of other archipelagic SIDS, small island developing states, such as, looking at the Maldives and Mauritius and Indian Ocean communities, and also the Caribbean. But it's very much geared towards specific conditions and scenarios. It's a bespoke solution that would possibly have other applications, but we need to see how it runs in the varied situations that we know exist in the Pacific.
Okay, great. Are there any additional projects in the MCST's pipeline that you can share with us?
Okay, where is that one? Oh, yes. So Well, I mentioned the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership, which is led by Marshall Islands and Fiji. We also, we're doing, not me specifically, Peter and Allison Newell and PJ Bodahandi from the law program at USB are doing incredibly important work at the IMO on Shipping High Ambition Coalition, working with the Marshall Islands Shipping Registry. We've been doing national level transport roadmap work for fulfillment and improvement of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions towards the Paris Climate Agreement. So yeah, we've got a number of different other projects that I've been involved with, and then others are in the program are involved with. And we're trying to make sure we're expanding it. It doesn't just all include marine transport. Some of it's land and aviation as well, especially on the road mapping exercises. But yeah, we're busy. There's lots to do.
It sounds it. Okay, so I've got two questions. One on the busy. Are there any opportunities for engineers, naval architects, etc., to actually work on the Carillion project or at MCST? Basically, are you hiring?
Yeah, so in the event of phase 2 approval, we know that there's going to be an opportunity for at least 2 additional research fellows to, I mentioned the monitoring, reporting, and verification elements. Absolutely need additional people. I can't do all of it. I can't be everywhere at once. I have to do the project management and some of the monitoring, but we need others working on that. MCST in general has been planning to recruit at least 4 additional staff, probably 6, to handle some of the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership work, the IMO work, and other tasks, including grant writing and some other material. We know that there's a priority to hire Pacific Island nationals wherever possible to reinforce regional capacity to meet the identified research and transport industry needs. I mentioned, if the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership goes forward, there will absolutely need to be additional capacity building and support provided by, for instance, other naval architects and marine engineers that need to help support the skill development of the 1,500 people I mentioned. We need to build all these boats. There are thousands of people from within the region that need to be provided with skills, and there will be a need for expertise from outside the region to supply that.
Fantastic. And probably, okay, the final question today, because I think we're going to have to come back and interview you again in 6 months' time and cover additional questions that we've got. But one thing that my members will be certainly interested in, but how can technology providers, other wind propulsion projects, ship owners, research organizations, how are you seeing them being able to engage with these projects? Will it be a matter of contacting you, discussing potential collaborations, or do you have a framework already open that's enables them to?
Yeah, anyone is willing to contact us at any point through the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport website. It's mcst-rmiusp.org. So it's Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport. RMI is for the Republic of Marshall Islands. USP is the University of the South Pacific.org. That's the organization we've got. And so I know Peter and I, our contact details are available. Our team is available at any point to discuss this. That's pretty much all we do at this point, is talk with others in the industry about solutions to these problems. And we are looking for appropriate solutions, technological, like I mentioned earlier on. Technology isn't the issue. There are so many options that can be utilized. We're just trying to make sure that we can connect the appropriate finance with the appropriate technology and basically devise a path forward with the governments and institutions in the region that need to provide better shipping services to these countries. So yeah, please get in touch. And I want to thank you again for assisting in the tender process that led to VPLP getting selected for this project. We had some very interesting discussions with some really, really innovative and enthusiastic partners. And I was, for me, this has been an enlightening process. I mentioned I grew up in a cornfield. I'm not a sailor. I'm not a naval architect. I'm a project manager. And for me, it's all about making sure that we get to the finish line and have the, viable, successful outputs that we really need to serve these communities. So we saw lots of really interesting propositions and technology proposed, and we would love to engage with more IWSA members going forward in any way possible.
Fantastic.
So thank you, Kevin, for this.
No, you're more than welcome. And I'm assuming any investors, financiers, or governments wishing to act as donors are always more than welcome.
Yeah, and I will say they're not going it alone. Like Peter's, I mentioned Peter's on a call right now with the Marshall Islands ambassador. There's World Bank money coming in. We've got commitments from some of the other bilateral donors to this project. We're constantly trying to make sure we hit that 500 million target in the next year or two, to make sure. Right now everything's being mobilized to set up the secretariat and get there with the entire sectoral demands for the region. So yeah,
fantastic.
We're glad to have IWSA involved and engaged on this. It's
fantastic.
Really,
well, we'll continue to support your efforts. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your evening to link up with me over in the UK. And as you mentioned before, anybody that's watching this that wants to contact Andrew, actually, I think your email address is actually right below your.
Oh yeah, it's in the presentation.
And in the presentation, and of course, IWSA is always open and willing to discuss any of the projects that we are interviewing today as well. So once more, thank you very much, Andrew, and good luck with everything. And we'll certainly come back and see how the progress is going, maybe in 6 months' time. 2021 is going to be an exciting year.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be sure. If it all gets approved in the next week or two, there will definitely be a press release, and we'll keep you informed. So
fantastic.
Thank you very much, and have a good night, or good day, I should say.
Thanks. You have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kevin.